Thanks for tuning in to the You're the Cure podcast. This podcast was created to teach you how to take authority over your health. Another great way to do this is by signing up to be a Veritas Wellness member, where you can be equipped and educated on how to reverse chronic diseases and to live life abundantly. If you choose Veritas Wellness, we'll walk alongside you, provide hours of wellness content, as well as educational courses from Dr. Ben. You were designed to be well. We would love to partner with you and teach you how to not need a doctor. Sign up today at veritaswellnessmember.com. And with all of that in mind, let's jump right into this week's episode of You're the Cure.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of You're the Cure. I'm Dr. Ben Edwards. Great show today. We've got the author of The Other Half of Church. Awesome book. I've read it twice now. I've taken all kinds of notes in this thing, and there's two authors actually, but we've got Michel Hendricks on the show today. Before we jump right in with Michel, I want to just set the stage a little bit. And if you've been watching the podcast for the last many months, really now, you probably understand, or you're starting to understand, there's a deeper thing that we've got to get to be truly well. We are a spirit housed in the flesh with a soul, and we've been so focused in the physical realm on the body. And typically it's a symptom called a disease, and we treat it with the pharmaceutical, and it's just treating a symptom. It's not getting to the root. So, of course, with Veritas, we try to get to the root. In 12 years of Veritas Medical, we've really pressed on dietary changes, exercise, hydration, supplements, and you can get a lot done with that, as y'all well know. But there's a ceiling that you hit. And you may get all the way well, but what we've seen in our experience is you'll regress, and these things will come back on you. Something new will pop up, or you'll just hit a ceiling and be stuck. And even worse is you get way better with this advice we gave you in the dietary realm, and then you stay on that diet for too long, low carb keto, and you end up crashing because you actually need carbs. And it's all this intellectual knowledge and really just purely scientific knowledge of man. But then you go to the Word, and it's all in the Word. You go to God's Word, and there's so much truth in there. But at least for me, it still stayed kind of intellectual, factual knowledge, doctrine. And there's some benefit to that. We're about to embark on a series called The Elementary Doctrines of the Kingdom, because I think there are some foundational pieces of just knowledge we need. Orphan versus son. What all did Jesus pay for? What did that atonement cover? Authority, that's a big deal. Body, soul, spirit, I mentioned already. I mean, there's some basic knowledge pieces that help me a bunch. But to me, that's kind of laying the foundational groundwork for these other things that we're going to talk about today. And really, it's not either or. We need both, and that's what Michael's going to tell you. Left brain, right brain is where we're going today. Our culture is dominated by left brain way of living. Whether that's in church or in school or just in life, we pursue knowledge and facts, and the IQ is put up on a pedestal. And then especially when it comes to sickness and health, and you go to your doctor, and he was 100% trained in facts and knowledge, and we in fact call it evidence-based medicine. And if you don't have a published study to back up your recommendation, then you pretty much can't give that recommendation. It's amazing how far we've gone on that side. But I'm so passionate about people being well. And as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And a merry heart doeth good like medicine. And just read today, Proverbs 14, what was it? A sound heart is healing to all the flesh. Don't quote me on that, but sound heart. I went and looked up that word in the Greek to see what does that mean. And basically it was a made whole, complete, full, healed heart is what heals the flesh. It's Proverbs 14:8, I think. Anyways, this is so important, guys. I would put it 90-10, and it's probably not even that, but 10% of this is probably in the natural, your diet, your exercise, sunshine, hydration. 90% of this mitochondrial function that we're after, I believe a mitochondria that's bathed in joy and peace, that's the kingdom. It's not about food and drink, righteousness, peace, and joy. A mitochondria bathed in that, it'll function, it'll perform, it'll have a high efficiency, very few free radicals will be produced, inflammation will go down, your cells will function, your neurons, your white blood cells, your heart muscle cells, all of them will function better. So how can we move the needle on that mitochondria? It's that deeper thing, the spiritual, the supernatural realm. So, Michael Hendricks, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Having me on. Yeah, it's fun to be here.
Well, I'm going to shut up now because you got so much to say. And I just, the last thing I want to say, I was re-listening to the audiobook this morning, and in the one part you said, this book will not transform your life.
Nope.
And I want to say that about this podcast, guys. This podcast won't transform your life. You can listen to this podcast every week for 10 years. Go back and listen to all the archive shows and read all the books. And it's not going to transform you. So, Michael, maybe first, I'd like you to introduce yourself. How'd you get to where you were, to where you are? If you do want to start with that, maybe, why would you say this book that you spent so much time, energy, and effort is not going to transform your life? Maybe that's a little tease line, but then let's back up and paint the picture of how you got here.
Yeah. So, a lot of times when someone writes a book, they've become like an expert, a subject matter expert, and they want to kind of write a book to show their expertise so that you can know what an expert I am and you can become an expert. And the other half of church was not that at all. It was almost just the opposite. It was written in a state of confusion, more questions than answers about specifically how do we mature and how is character actually formed and transformed? And so I came into this, I was a pastor of spiritual formation and discipleship at a large church here in Colorado. And I was, essentially tasked with we had a church that it was kind of an interesting environment, and that I was really, really good at getting people in through the doors that would normally never even consider going to church. And so we were really good at that. But what we didn't have much of a vision on or any intentionality was how do we then, when people come through the doors of our church and bump into Jesus and start walking with Jesus, how do we actually help them grow to maturity? How do we help the leaders who are already on staff? We see holes in maturity in ourselves and others. How do you assess how do I assess my own maturity? How do I do that with others? And what is character and how is character formed? Like I kept asking all these questions. Jesus is pretty clear that, the main task he gave his disciples is to go out wherever they went and make disciples all over the world, wherever God happens to take them. And then to teach them to obey everything he commanded them. And it was that thing, which is very clear. Jesus is not vague at all about that. But what he doesn't elucidate is how. Like as a pastor of discipleship, Jesus would have said, and here's my 17-step process on how you actually teach people to obey everything and by the way, when Jesus says obey everything I've commanded, if you knit the key scriptures, when he talks about commands, all of his commands fall under one dual main command, which is love.
Yeah.
Loving God and loving the people around you. And as a matter of fact, he later, when in the letters to the churches of Revelation, and Jesus is addressing each church, there's a particular church he addresses, and Ephesus is saying, you've lost your first love. And so when you lose your love, you need to stop everything else. Basically, Jesus says, stop everything else for now, get your love working again, and then do the other stuff. But if you're doing really good, powerful things in ministry, if you're doing all sorts of wonderful things in our society, but you're not doing it from a base of a love that looks like the love Jesus demonstrated when he was on earth, and that we feel from him even now through the Holy Spirit, then it's, God says it's, it's a clanging cymbal and gong, and I have to plug my ears.
Yeah. And that's really, I think, at the root of where I'm trying to go to with patients is getting them to have that light bulb moment of it's that kind of love that I think is what's going to flip the resonance of that mitochondria. That's where all disease is rooted now we're seeing is in the mitochondria. So there's some connection there that I'm almost positive is happening, but proceed. Well, one more comment on Jesus, and this is from the book too. That maturation you're talking about, you get them in the door, but then what about maturing? And I might misquote this, but I think you said, we know we're getting along that maturation path when our automatic response in any situation looks like how Jesus would have done that. I mean, we just automatically, it comes out of us automatically. Well, that seems like a tall order. And I think it can be switched with, oh no, I just got to be good and not sin, keep all this fruit looking good, but no, it's a heart thing.
Right.
But go ahead.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into me. So, imagine I'm sitting in this situation as a discipleship pastor. I kept running into it because I did trainings and wrote a book and did Bible reading plans and would have all this really good response, like, Michael, this stuff has changed my life. This is actually, one person said, this saved my marriage, this training you did. But that was just sometimes. And there would always be another group of people that they would just say, this, I just didn't know how to do this. This stuff, I just didn't get traction, or I guess this doesn't work for me. And so I kept bumping into that word sometimes, which made me, as an engineer, similar to a doctor trying to figure out a disease or something, I came to the point where I think, I thought I'm missing big pieces of the puzzle about how people mature and how character's formed. I'm not missing all the pieces because it works sometimes.
Yeah.
But when something just works sometimes, what that really usually means is you're missing some big variables.
Yeah.
And so I had more questions than answers. Some of the questions I had was like, why do I sometimes see, people who are not Christians, I see them treating people better than some Christians I know.
Yeah.
Not all Christians, but why does that happen? Shouldn't that be what the Christian life develops?
Mm-hmm.
And what did I see? Sometimes I would see Christian leaders and leaders of Christian organizations acting in ways which didn't look like Jesus at all. And specifically around how they treated people. Strangely, that's kind of the thing that stuck out to me. And why don't we see more radical transformation of character in our churches? Kind of like we see in Acts when essentially a sociopathic narcissist bumps into Jesus, and I don't know how many years later, 20 years later, something writes 1 Corinthians 13 on love. Like how do you go from being the narcissist that Saul was to being a Paul who essentially, he redefined the Hebrew word hesed for love that functions as attachment, and he put that on agape, and then he just spends a whole chapter on elucidating. It's one of the most beautiful chapters in the whole New Testament. Like, why don't we see that more often?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And predators turning into protectors.
Mm.
All of maturity really is a slow process through many individual skills we start to master, but it's a slow progression from predatorial instincts to protector instincts.
Mm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, I remember I got to the point where I'd be in my office at our church, and I'd be staring at this dry erase board and just almost like asking God for a picture, because I'm like, I don't, to be honest, I don't know, God, if I know how to do my job as a discipleship pastor, because I don't understand how these things work. I mean, I think I'm missing something. And it was in the middle of that I got a phone call from a man. He's an elder of a church in Denver. They'd come and visited our church, and he saw the book I wrote for brand new Christians. And he saw went on our website and saw some other stuff. And he called me up and he said, I would love to have lunch with you, Michael, because I looked you up on your website, and I would love to talk to you about some things. And so we had lunch together, and he said, Michael, I'm a long-term friend of Dallas Willard, who's kind of this discipleship guru, talked about discipleship, getting it back into the church. And he said, Dallas Willard would kind of complain. One of his complaints was that, it seemed to Dallas that everyone was reading his books, but hardly any churches were actually doing discipleship with any kind of rigorousness. And this man looked across the table over lunch to me, and he said, it looks like you're actually doing it, Michael. And normally that would be a compliment, right? Yeah. But I was swimming in this, this confusion and frustration, and not feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. And so my response to that was, yeah, but, and I told him basically what I just said, why does it work sometimes and not other times? And why do I see this? Why do I see? And he's the one who said, well, why don't we start meeting every lunch? Let's start having lunch every month, once a month, you and I will get together and we'll study discipleship and try to figure out some of these questions you have. And I pulled another pastor in with us. So the three of us started meeting every month. And it was about maybe 6 months into meeting together where this man, Bob, said an interesting thing. He said, Michael and John, I think we're missing and we're not addressing one area of discipleship that might be important. And that's how God designed the human brain. And when he said that, I thought, I have no idea what you're talking about. I actually eventually told him. He had to repeat it a couple times in other meetings. And I said, Bob, I have no idea what you're talking about. Neuroscience and the Bible and discipleship. What do you mean by this? And he said, well, let me invite my friend, Dr. Jim Wilder, to our lunch next month. I think he can explain it better than I can. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we show up for lunch, and this other man, Dr. Wilder's there. And he looks at me across the table and basically says, Michael, what do you want of this lunch? And I kind of shared some of my frustrations and, the sense that I'm missing big pieces of the puzzle. And he said something very interesting. He said, Michael, I think it might help you if you want answers to these questions. It might help you to understand a little bit about how God designed the human brain to mature us and to form our character. And then he bent over into his bag and he pulled out a plastic brain and he unhooked the sides and started showing how the flow of the control processor of the human brain, and how there's a right brain and a left brain, and the right brain is a really fast brain. It's when we know things instantly and we don't know why we know it. That's also the social, emotional, relational brain is the right brain. And then the left brain is a slower brain, and these two brains work together. He said we kind of have like two brains, but they work really close together. But the left brain is kind of what we think of as the brain in modern culture. It's thinking and problem solving and believing the right things and using willpower, making better choices, that kind of thing, putting words to stuff and understanding it, being able to explain it. And then he said a very interesting thing. He goes, Michael, one of the reasons why we're not seeing more radical transformation and why we're seeing these things that you just mentioned is because we've put, over the last 300 to 500 years, the church has slowly put more and more of our Christian discipleship into the left brain and has largely ignored the right brain. And what that means from brains, layman's terms for brain science, it means we've taught people really well about believing the right things and making better choices and using our willpower. All those are really important, but those are largely left brain slow things. But we haven't been developing our very fast relational, social, emotional brain, which is looking for other very important things. And he said, and when you look at the brain science, the right brain is actually more important and more center to the formation of character and building maturity than it's full brain, those processes. But if anything, it leans harder on the right brain than left brain. And that's the side we're leaving out.
Right. Yeah.
And when he said that, I was like all ears. I was like, okay, wait a second. You're saying things I've never heard before.
Yeah.
Right? I'd been a Christian for maybe 35 years or something like that. And I'd gone to seminary, been a missionary, done all this kind of stuff. And no one had ever mentioned the role the brain plays and what it reveals to us about how God designed us to grow and to thrive as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that was really kind of a beginning of a path into some uncharted, what we would call virgin snow in Colorado, snow that had never been skied on or hadn't been skied on for a long time. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's been my journey. My wife went along with me. That's been our journey for the last 7 years and has led to me writing the other half of church with Jim Wilder. And I'm consulting with a lot of churches now. So that's how I got where I am.
Well, thank you for that. It reminded me of one of the pages I dog-eared here and starred. Y'all wrote, what at first sounded like theoretical brain science suddenly challenged my understanding of how we grow spiritually. Many Western Christians believe character is formed by thinking correctly, believing truth, and making wise choices in light of the truth. I mean, that all sounds really good.
Yep, that's what I was taught.
Yeah. And I do want to emphasize, Michael already said, we're two brain. It's not either or.
Yeah, those things are important.
Yes. So we need these things.
Big stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where at the beginning of the show saying this book, this podcast, and just information alone is not going to transform you. And it's really that transformed heart that's going to allow you to react just like Jesus. I mean, the word Christian originally, they saw these people that these followers of Christ, little Christ-like ones. They look so similar to Christ. They just called them little Christ-like ones. Yeah. And I imagine because their reactions and their just the way they automatically treated each other, lived and loved. But so that means their heart was, and their left and right brain, both fully engaged. And I can speak for myself for sure. My left brain's been super engaged,
Yep.
both religiously and academically. Another quote, left brain discipleship emphasizes beliefs, doctrines, willpower, and strategies, like you said, but neglects right brain loving attachments, joy, emotional development, and identity. Ignoring the right brain relational development creates Christians who believe in God's love but have difficulty experiencing it in daily life, especially during distress.
Yep.
I put a double, triple star on that because that is what we see with our clients, with our patients, that most of them go to church, most of them love Jesus, most are saved, but there's that missing piece. And which is when I read the book, such a light bulb moment. And so I wanted to bring you on the show because I see this as just a key thing to delve into. So maybe you can continue on if you want to connect a few more dots, whatever Dr. Wilder taught you about how this thing works, or what you practically do from that point. Because you were in a church in charge of discipleship, had written a book or books and resources on probably facts and knowledge and doctrine. What happened? Did you leave that setting? Did you go on your own personal journey? Did you just incorporate both? And I mean, it's been 7 years now, kind of take it from there.
Yeah. So I kind of had similar questions after I explained how the brain functions and how information flows through the brain, and what at each stage there's a 5-level control processor, and each level asks a different question and performs a different task, but on our relational surroundings and on everything that's coming in at us. Right. And so he's explaining these, and I said, and that's when he said, the right brain is the dominant part of the brain for forming character, but the left brain's where we've been focusing, and we've been largely been ignoring. Well, I said, well, what does that mean practically? Like, what's something that, we as Christians maybe wouldn't think of as important until you look at the brain, and then all of a sudden you like read your Bible and you see all these things you've never seen before because you didn't know they were important, right? And then Jim Wilder said, well, there's one thing, what's kind of the first thing the brain was designed to look for, even the first thing we look for when we were born, but it's also the first thing we look for. Say you walk into a party all alone when you have a couple friends there, and the first thing your eyes and your brain are looking to, it's like the first thing we do in any situation. And he said that thing's called joy, really relational joy. And he said the definition of joy that aligns with the neuroscience that's come out of UCLA is that joy is it's what I feel in my body when I can tell from the face and eyes and other nonverbal parts of a person that they're happy to be with me and that I'm special to them. It's like the feeling to be, it's the feeling we get when we know we're special to someone.
But
and
visually seeing that in their face and their eyes.
Their face, their eyes twinkle. Dr. Alan Shore, who discovered this control processor, he says it's the twinkle in your eye that communicates to me that you're glad to be with me. So it's our eyes, our faces light up, our voice tone, not the words so much, but the voice tone. That's why you can build joy with a baby through words, but they don't understand a word, but you're going, oh, you're such a beautiful little girl. Yeah. They don't understand a single word if they're 3 months old, but they can tell from my voice tone and my eyes and my face all together. And they go, wow, daddy really, really likes me. And that joy is absolutely essential to the organization of the infant brain.
Wow.
It's by interactions of joy, more dominantly with the father too, but dominantly with the mother, interactions of joy and rest, joy and peace, that combination of a good circle of joy and peace with mother that actually organizes the infant's brain. And really what's happening is the mother is downloading part of her brain, the cingulate cortex. She's downloading her brain through her left eye to the baby's left eye. And we actually call it the mother core because you essentially get the cingulate cortex that your mother has through exercises of joy and peace.
Wow.
And so that can be good news for some people and not so good news to others. You can download a pretty undeveloped cingulate cortex. The good news is that you can build joy for the rest of your life. So even if you had a low joy, or it could be too that your mother had a really serious disease when you were born, and so you didn't get the joy that your siblings did, or things like that happen. But the good news there also is that is not a life sentence, because the joy center of the brain is the one area that's continually growing for the rest of our life, which is the right prefrontal cortex.
Wow.
And so we can always fill in and build in. Really, that's what the church was meant to be. It was meant to be a high joy and high peace environment where we can mature, which means we can get some of the stuff we were meant to get from our families, but our families didn't give us, so that we can function at a high relational level.
Yeah.
And functioning at a high relational level means we don't collapse in distress. That's really, yes, a lot of times we're nervous. We're actually mature in good situations, but when we get nervous or distressed, that's when our maturity will collapse on us.
Yeah. So back to Dr. Wilder explaining this with the plastic brain and these connections and the joy and eyes and face and expressions and tone of voice.
Yeah.
Were there other things, or did you just try to start implementing that, or kind of what happened next?
Well, I did ask him, well, because there's a lot more than just joy. We do need joy, but his phrase was, joy really functions a lot like the fuel, like the relational fuel of the brain. So it's kind of like the gas tank. And so when you have a brand new, perfect car, just like this beautiful, brand new 0-mile car, but if it has no gas in the tank, how useful is it to you? And the human brain is very similar. We, even if our brain's developed, if our joy is low, again, joy means we don't have many faces in our life of people who are happy to be with us. And and especially we haven't had many joyful faces, people happy to be with us throughout our lifetime. Because you can build joy from memories of people as well as people live right in front of you. And of course, the super high joy life, or a good solid fuel tank filler, is when you have in real life present, a good exposure to people who are happy to be with you, and you have memories that we have some exercises where you go back in memories where you felt Jesus was happy to be with you, other people were happy to be with you, and memories you're grateful for and feel a connection with Jesus, and sit in those memories. Like for a few minutes. Don't think about the memories, sit in them and just soak. We call it like a jacuzzi. And then that also fills your joy, because you're remembering what it's like when Jesus gave you a good gift and his smile on his face, seeing that you enjoyed it so much. It could be something as simple as a beautiful sunrise or something in nature, but it could also be when you met your best friend, or your child was born, or when something beautiful happened around you. But when we can maintain the connection, sense that Jesus was involved in that, then we're building joy with Jesus as well. And so there's a very, very much a network of joy where we build Jesus with God and we build Jesus with people around us. And those two are inseparable, right? If you read 1 John, the book, he says over and over again, you know that you love God when you love the people around you. And when you're loving the people around you, you're proving that you love God. So basically he's saying you can't separate loving God from loving people. He even goes real far and says, if you hate your brother and sister, you don't know who God is, because God is love. And so those are strong words. Like I even read them, I'm like, whoa, that's convicting. But it shows the inability to separate love for God and love for people. But one of those big factors is building joy and receiving the joy of God. Right? In Numbers, Moses and Aaron were given a blessing to say all the people of Israel. And it's interesting what that blessing starts out is, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may the Lord's face shine upon you. I remember reading that after, reading about Dr. Shore and his research and stuff. And I remember reading that verse and saying, wait a second, this is the neurological definition of joy that Dr. Alan Shore discovered. But of course, God, 3,000 years before, or however long that was, he knew all along what we need in order to, be drawn close to someone, because he was drawing close, wanting the Israel people to draw close to him.
Yeah. So as you were learning this, how did you start trying to apply that in your own life, or how did that look in your circle of friends, or your community, your church? How did you start developing this?
Yeah. So, the foundational skills for building a solid maturity is the combination and balanced intertwine between joy and peace. And so kind of the starting skills we learn is how to build joy through letting your face shine on people and receiving other people's faces shining on you, and also having good practices of gratitude. So all those things build joy, and then also some good exercises that strengthen the quieting system of your brain. So joy is not a quieting system. It's an energy, and it's you call it sympathetic, right? It's kind of energizes your brain. And then there's quieting, which relaxes your brain. And it's the joy and peace kind of balance that we look for in our relationships with each other.
Mm.
And so we created some exercises that you do every morning. It's like a workout. It's like a gym workout, but you're working out your parasympathetic system. You're working out your quieting system. And so some of those are things that inject energy, and then we calm it with a nice deep breath. And then we inject energy and calm it with a nice deep breath. You do those there's like three different ones we do, and we have people do 3 of those 3 times a day, do those for 3 times over maybe 2, 3, 4 months.
Mm.
And when you do that, you've really strengthened, not only you're strengthening the joyful system, you're strengthening the quieting system. And that's everything else relies on those 2 things being developed. And a lot of us never got those developed growing up. Like I specifically did not get my quieting system very well developed from my parents. They didn't really know how to quiet themselves, and so they couldn't teach me well how to quiet. They were fairly joyful, and I grew up with joy, but I didn't learn how to quiet myself well, and so I had to learn how to do this as an adult. And in our society, with these things,
Mm-hmm.
we're not ever quieting ourselves. We get some downtime. It's like zipping, we're on our phone doing this. And that's also high energy, and you're not letting yourself rest. And so more and more what we do is we're not letting ourselves, we don't know how to quiet big emotions. And even we don't know how to quiet positive stuff. Sometimes there's some excitement in life, and then it spins us out and we get exhausted because we don't know how to quiet ourselves, even in positive emotions.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of the maturity we want to develop is, can we quiet? Do we know how to calm big emotions and calm ourselves down when our hamster wheel is spinning pretty fast for a while?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially like you said, in this society, I can't imagine kids in particular. I think the top complaint in pediatric or young adult doctor visits is this brain that's just going, and including anxiety, not learning how to quiet that, and much less the joy, but that quieting of the brain.
Yep.
A standard American it just doesn't happen.
Right. It was much healthier to have a bunch of social interaction at school, and then you come home and you got to kind of rest from it.
Yeah.
And you get your battery charged, and the next day you have school. But now it's school, and you come home and get on your phone. Oh, how many likes did I get on this comment?
Yeah.
And it's like you spin that thing until you close your eyes, and then you can't sleep because you spun yourself up.
Yep.
And so, yeah, this is a skill we're losing, which is what we're trying to do, is let's get this skill back in our churches, especially back in our country.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then the whole left brain side is really pushed as far as, academically.
Yep.
Like, yeah, go to school all day, but then there's extracurricular stuff. There's extra studying, there's extra homework. Then there's physical things too, which that's good to exercise. But even that gets taken to such an extreme as far as just busy and not being quiet.
Yep.
You got to be in every sport, and it's all year long. There's summer ball and fall ball and spring ball when it used to just be spring ball. But
Right.
it's just go, go, go. And then our identity's wrapped up in our performance, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I want to talk a little bit about this word hesed.
Yeah.
That's chapter 4 in the book. Joy is chapter 3. Explain to the listeners what that is. Why is it important? Not only important, it's crucial. This whole thing doesn't work without it.
Yeah. Hesed is it's the Hebrew word that is most easily translated love, but it's a big word. It's bigger than love. So usually translators of the Hebrew use a couple words, like, one of the Bible versions uses unfailing love, or everlasting loving kindness, or loyal love, or all sorts, just because it's a big word, very important word. And Hesed was such an important word to the Hebrew nation that the Apostle Paul, like I said, used a chapter in 1 Corinthians to redefine it in the word that other people would know, which is agape, which was not a very used word during the time of Jesus' life in the early church. It was, we don't see that word come up a lot. And so Hesed really is a love that functions as an attachment. Attachment meaning it's like a bond between people, like a family bond that is not broken, and that in its best sense, it is life, brings life and well-being to both people involved. And Hesed, our attachments also function a little bit like a firewall to the rest of our brain. And so a lot of times we are actually changed we're changed more than any other way, even more than practices. And practices are important. They're a big, important part of it, but even more important than practices. And we need to do both. But the most important is that we're bonded to people in our community, in our churches, who are more mature than we are. And we're bonded to some people who are at our same basic kind of maturity level, so that we're ironing sharpened irons. Like maybe you have some skills I don't, or some relational skills, and I have some you don't, and we can sharpen each other. And then we have some people who are younger than us, or not as far down the road, and we can start passing along to them what we've been learning on our journey from sharpening each other, and from also seeing these elder men and women who know how to do relational things that I don't know how to do right now. And our brain is always looking for a better trained brain relationally. And so, but that we don't just let ourselves be trained by any old brain. There has to be this level of bonding that we call Hesed, or this neuroscience called attachment. And so a lot of churches are they're more set up like religious organizations rather than spiritual families. And a religious organization's primarily set up to get good religious things done. Whereas a Hesed family, they're more important about, are we bonding and creating a family that will survive into all eternity, well beyond the grave.
Yeah, that's night and day difference.
Yep. Some churches do it. Many churches don't.
Yeah.
Some churches avoid it on purpose because it's kind of scary and dangerous. So,
right.
Yep.
So maybe let's talk a little bit, not trying to throw any churches under the bus or anything, but if you're in an environment that's left brain dominant, not developing joy and Hesed, what's some of the fruit that you'll see? I mean, you've kind of already spoken to it. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. But specifically in the book, what I'm thinking about is that narcissistic leader, which that's a big, bad, ugly word. But I mean, the reality of that. So chapter 6, healthy correction, stop being so nice. And chapter 7, narcissism, the relational infection. So, I mean, there's true consequences, real consequences. And you said earlier in the show on, you see the way people treat each other.
Right.
So, I mean, this is important stuff. This is real fruit that's coming out of folks' lives, and just from not being raised up in the fullness of both brains. So maybe speak to some of that fruit that I'm sure people have seen, in their own church or their own life.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times you see, Christian ministries and Christians doing stuff with their churches and doing really good things, but not necessarily with really good character or in a very loving manner. And we also see, people getting used, and it's like a transactional relationship, and the church will use you as long as you do what they want you to do and get behind, versus where, we're with you thick and thin. And kind of the ultimate result over time of a left brain Christianity is narcissistic leadership. Leaders, we hire leaders who are narcissistic, and narcissistic basically means they're unable to take healthy correction, unwilling and unable to take healthy correction. And instead they'll just justify themselves, and they will, bring people in or push people out according to how much they're in, giving narcissistic supply to the leader, doing what he says or she says, or getting behind them and any kind of pushback, and then bam, you're out. And we see this a lot. I get contacted by lots of churches, and you just see this over and over again because we have a kind of a broken picture of what healthy leadership is. We think leaders are really fast acting, super aggressive people that get stuff done, and they'll run over people if they have to, but they'll get that thing done. Whereas according to the brain, and I believe the Bible as well, mature people are people who know to love really well. They can love in really intense and distressing environments. They stay kind and calm. They keep acting like themselves, even when everyone else is losing their heads. They know who we are, and they constantly remind the people around them who we really are when we forget who we are. And that definition of who we are looks very much like God. It looks very much like the character we see in God, our Father, and Jesus, and feel in the Holy Spirit in our lives. And things like compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's what Paul wrote to the Colossian church. He said, "This is your clothing. You know, if you have hesed with God, and you're set aside special by Him, then you should be putting on clothing, and the clothing is compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." So when we stop being compassionate or kind or humble, when I'm not gentle with you, or when I lose my cool really fast with you, that shows I've kind of gone naked. I've lost my heavenly clothing. And so the mature people are the ones that keep that clothing on, even when things get, what hits the fan. Mm-hmm. They keep it together, and they still know, and they can maintain their connection with Jesus. They can calm their emotions and come back really quickly when they get overwhelmed, or, when they go non-relational. They recognize it really easy and know how to get their brain back relational again. And they keep acting like themselves. A lot of the times when we when we stop acting like ourselves, it's because that part of our brain is kind of cramped up on us. That's one of the things we train. How do you tell, what are the signs that this relational part of your brain is cramped up? And what's it feel like in your body? What kind of things do you do and say when you do that? And then how do you get your brain back on? How do you uncramp it so that it starts working again? That's, your whole brain doesn't cramp up, but just the part of the brain that's central to us loving well. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's a part of the brain that, those words, compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, all of those things are produced out of that area of the brain. All the sensors and everything God gave us very much according to who He is. But that can cramp up, and all of a sudden we won't act like that. That's when we do things and say things, and later we go, why did I do that? I mean, why did I say that? Those crazy mysteries of our lives, why we act certain ways. Yep. And that needs to be trained. Okay, let's practice sharing with our community when we lost our relational brain, and share with them, how did we get our brain back on again? Mm-hmm. That's another example of a right brain practice that helps us love really well when the pressure is on.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing from you over and over also is the community aspect. The people around you reminding you who we are. How does our people react in situations like that? But also your specific, unique identity, reminding who you are. So with that low right brain development, without that relational connection, you're just going to be so much more vulnerable. You're only going to be able to do so much in your own willpower.
Right.
And really, that's again the whole point of where we're trying to go with this whole mitochondrial dysfunction. When we're under distress, we should be able to still walk through things, maintain our mitochondrial resiliency. And the biggest mitochondrial builder, in my opinion, is exactly what we're talking about today: developing that right brain, that relational identity, the community, the hesed. I mean, all of it. It's this huge kind of missing piece of the puzzle. Can you talk a little bit, Michael, about what did you mean with healthy correction? Stop being so nice. I mean, we're in relation to what we're talking about, community. I'm assuming it's, hey, you kind of lost yourself right there. Let's remind you who you are, but how do you do that the right way?
The better question is, how do you learn to do it the right way? And the way you learn to do it the right way is practicing it in your community. Mm. Love is at the center of every command Jesus gave us. And the hardest command Jesus gave us is to love our enemies.
Yeah.
And so that is something we've preached, in churches regularly, but it's not something we've ever told people, well, how do we practice so that we can actually do this? And it's not primarily something you can grit your teeth and do it by willpower, because it doesn't work that way. And so to become a people who spontaneously love the most difficult people around them, is that we build a group identity around that. And so we have individual identity, how God uniquely created each one of us. That's important as far as of identity, but there's also a group identity that's shared. And churches that develop really good group identity, like one central group identity statement is that as followers of Jesus, we are a people who love our enemies and return their cursings with blessings. Right? Straight out of Jesus's mouth. But we can also create really good group identity statement out of each of the words in that Colossians 3:12 I mentioned: compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Right? We are a people who you might say we are people who keep relationships as more important than problems, even when we may be having a problem. And even when we're having a disagreement, we still remain compassionate and kind and gentle and humble and patient. Mm-hmm. And if that's something over a year we're repeating to each other, this needs to be something we say to each other, even in a church service or in a small group. Kind of like we do with doctrinal statements, we need to add group identity statements to those doctrinal statements. And then later, if you see me all of a sudden, like say we're in staff together or something, and you see me, let's say someone offers an idea to try to solve this problem we're having as this group, as our church, and I just dismiss it and kind of roll my eyes, right? As the leader.
Yep.
Well, you're around the table too. You see me. We've been practicing group identity on these things. After that meeting's over, the question is, you can either do nothing and say, okay, I'm not going to go do that. Or you can go over to my office, knock on my door and say, hey, Michael, that's a good meeting. I appreciate a couple of things you said. However, that one case, when Bob had that one answer to that question that you didn't think it was a valid answer, but I felt you kind of almost rolled your eyes at him. And it occurred to me, that's not the Michael Hendricks I know. And maybe it is, maybe something's going on and you had a hard morning, before you came to church or something. But also, I just wanted to remind you who we are as people, and that we keep relationships bigger than problems, and we keep them specifically. Relationships is more important than anything else. Even when someone comes up with an idea that's not, maybe we think is a dumb idea, that doesn't let us off the hook from being compassionate and kind and gentle and humble.
Yeah.
Now, if you and I have a Hesed bond and you're doing this in a way that's very relational, and your face at the same time is saying, our relationship's good and I'm still very happy to be with you, but I think you forgot who you were back there. Then you've just rewired my brain. You just done some, rewiring there.
Yeah.
That will affect my future spontaneous behavior.
Yeah.
That is outside willpower. It's too fast.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that reminds me of another part of the book, going back to the narcissism thing, that I think you define that as the inability to properly process shame.
Yep.
Or that's where it originated or started out at. They had a moment or an event and shame came, and now they're going to do all they can to prevent shame from ever coming again, therefore can't take correction.
Yep. Yeah, the definition of shame from kind of the neuroscience standpoint is it's what I feel in my body when I can tell from your face and eyes that you're not happy to be with me. It's like anti-joy, right?
Yeah.
And shame is a very important emotion. And there's also a toxic form of shame that we should not ever receive. The toxic form of shame is you're a bad person, right? But there's no relational connection that's affirmed, and I'm not showing you a way out. I'm not reminding you, that you forgot who you were, and remind you who we really are. Instead, I was just saying, if you do this in another meeting, another time, you're going to be off our staff team, and I slam the door to your office and walk back to mine. That's toxic because I leave you alone in your shame. Now, healthy shame is what we just modeled in the previous correction, where you come to my office, you probably even affirm our attachment first. because that gives me some energy to handle it. And then you say, Michael, when you rolled your eyes at that person, that's not the Michael Hendricks I know.
Yep.
And so that's very relational, and yet it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
Shame hurts even when it's healthy, but it should be just a prick of shame. But it's that, our brain is actually designed to not change without a little bit of pain.
Mm. Yeah.
And shame really is the healthy form of shame is the pain that forms our character.
Yeah.
So if then you repeat what you said about narcissists, that a narcissist is a person who does not know how to metabolize shame in a relational way. What that means is the narcissist is stuck. Their character is stuck because they won't accept any healthy correction. And so that is a person who's gone off the road and they're stuck in the mud and their wheels are just spinning, character-wise.
Mm.
The question is, do we help that person? And in Colorado, when you see someone go off the road in snow and they're stuck, it's really bad manners just to drive on by, right? Pull over, make sure they're okay. If you can't get them out, at least you can give them a warm car to sit in and until the tow truck gets there or whatever. But with narcissists, they're difficult people. They also, a lot of times, they're the leader, so they can fire you. A lot of times you'll try to pull a narcissist out of the mud and he'll fire you.
Mm.
And so you need to have a lot of courage to do it. And yet it's acting like ourself to help someone in need, even if they're a narcissist who thinks they're fine, but they're not. They're, from God's eyes, they're stuck in a great weakness.
So how would you go, or have you figured out how to go about addressing that successfully?
Yeah, there's a whole book on that written by Jim Wilder called The Pandora Problem.
Mm.
And the quick answer is that group identity is your friend. Attachment and group identity is your friend. So if you've developed an attachment to this leader and that you're building some group identity around who we are, as the family, members of the family of God. And a lot of times you can kind of do that with a narcissist when it's away from a problem solved, because they'll think, oh yeah, I agree with this. And they'll start to absorb the group identity, whether they realize it or not. And then when you see them act in a way that doesn't look like your group identity that you've been affirming for your community, you can say to them, that doesn't sound like the group identity we're doing. Let me remind you who we are. And you might have given that narcissist a chance to change, actually.
Yeah. That's good.
Not always, though. Sometimes they will either, if they're the leader, they'll get rid of you, or if you're their leader and they see you doing that, maybe they'll leave the church because they realize I can't control my environment here then using my strategies.
Yeah.
So there are no guarantees, but there have been some stories of people that have brought life to a narcissist and really shown them that, shame doesn't kill you. And there's a very beautiful relational shame. A lot of times narcissists have just been exposed to toxic shame. Mm-hmm. And so part of that's not even their fault. It's probably when they were young.
Yeah.
And, a lot of us only know toxic shame just because we've kind of lost that as a culture.
Yeah.
But when you see someone correct another person really beautifully and relationally, but firm, it is just a beautiful thing. Mm. And when you see someone accept correction too, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of kids, obviously. I mean, training up, we have 6 kids.
Yeah.
The 6-year-old's our youngest. And just thinking about, how to correct them in a healthy way, obviously. Powerful stuff. You learn this for your children. But like you said, at any time.
My wife and I said real quick that we wish we would have learned this 20 years ago when our kids were in the house with us still.
Yeah.
So those of you who are listening this and you're younger, you have kids in the house, or maybe you don't have children yet, or maybe you're not married yet, we'll dive into this stuff before you have kids, man, oh man. And then you pass it on to them really easily.
Yeah.
So we bless you if that's the case. It's good for everyone, but especially the younger people.
Yeah. Well, we've got just a few more minutes here. What are some of the ways to dive into that? Obviously, the book, here it is again, guys, The Other Half of Church. Highly recommend it. There we go.
Yep.
But as far as other resources, websites, I know the appendix has some things. The maturity stages, an enemy mode checklist, pseudo joy checklist, joy on demand exercises, soil assessment questions. If you want talk about any of those briefly, but also just other programs you have, the website, other ways for people to continue to dive into what we've talked about today.
Yeah, well, first of all, read The Other Half of Church. It's kind of the on-ramp book to all this stuff. So it's a good way to start. And then there's a bunch of ministries and things we do and our partner ministries do. Like we have a program where we have a six meeting study group that takes you through The Other Half of Church and the basics of the life model. The life model is this brain and Bible coordinated discipleship and maturity formation, philosophy. And our website's lifemodelworks.org. And if you go there, look up study groups, and you can sign up for study groups, and they're like $129 or something for you do it 6 weeks, every other week. And you go through it with a group of 8 to 10 other people. And so that's an easy on-ramp, or reading the book is the other way to kind of for the on-ramp. But a couple other next ones, if you're ready to jump in the deep into the pool, if you have some people in your church and you've read The Other Half of Church and you'd love your church to do that, and you have a group of people that would be excited about it, go to our website and look for our consulting and, fill that out, and it'll send me an email. And then I take you through a training, a year-long training in relational skills that help us operate at a high relational level and form in us a love that looks a lot like Jesus's love. And usually we meet twice a month for a year. And then there's also Thrive training at thrivetoday.org. They have a week-long training on relational skills, Monday through Friday, all day long, super intense, really good. My wife and I have been through all 3 years of it. And so if you're interested in that, it's the thrivetoday.org, and look for their premier training, which they hold twice a year, one week in Holland, Michigan in July, and then another week in Denver, Colorado in October.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. Awesome book, great interview, so much good information. I know it's going to really touch a lot of people. And just to reiterate, guys, to the audience, intellectual knowledge will maybe set the stage. That's what I've found in the science realm, medical realm, doctor realm. People are sick, these diseases, it's scary, all this stuff, symptoms. It's real stuff. I'm not saying to ignore the physical stuff. That's why doctors treat symptoms, but just remember that's what it is. It's symptom treatment. You can do it pharmaceutically, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, acid reflux. Those are all symptoms. That's smoke from the fire. Those are reversible. We didn't learn that in med school, but now we know this. Or you can do it nutraceutically, lots of supplements, lots of IVs we do, different vitamin drips and stuff like that. But that is symptom treatment. So do that if you want to, but while you're getting your IV drip, grab the book and start reading it. But really it's that right brain that we're missing so much, and where that's going to open your soil of your heart for, is to hear about your true identity, to hear the voice of God, to make these connections and just be able to ultimately the joy and the peace, which can only come from the source, Jesus. But the way that he set this thing up, he's the head of the body, the church, which is his body. He's the head. We're the members of the body, and we're supposed to be this spiritual family, iron sharpening iron. And in your local, you've got to have that community. There's no other way around it. We weren't built to be isolated. So just want to encourage everybody to explore the book, continue to explore the truth in the peace pillar. Consult with your wellness navigator. If you're new to the show, veritaswellnessmember.com. You can get on there, $35 a month. You can get all the diet and lifestyle you want, advice and tips and all that, recipes, whatever, exercise videos. But you can also join small groups. You can get with our Wellness Navigator guides who are getting more and more well-versed in the right brain things, relational things, identity things. So you'll check that out. Michael, again, thanks for joining us today. Sure love your book. Love having you on.
Thank you for inviting me on, Dr. Ben.
You bet. All right, everybody. We'll be back next week with another great show. I'm Dr. Ben Edwards. You're the Cure. See you next week.